This is Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Every Monday on Soundside, we catch you up on the top stories that are fascinating right now and what they say about the Pacific Northwest. We call it Front Page. And Seattle Times City Hall reporter David Kroman is here to help me out with the Front Page. And it's always good to have you on today, especially because I feel like Front Page being a newspaper-inspired segment, this is spiritually the correct role for you. David, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, there is still some modest competition at the Seattle Times to be on the front page. Even though most of us maybe don't actually get an actual copy of the paper, it is still nice to walk into the office and see your article on the front page. So I appreciate any reference to A1.
Oh, that's so quaint. I love that still exists. Well, I want to get to our first story here. It's a serious one. It's one that I think brings together a lot of our conversations about immigration right now, but it brings it together in one image. And that is this photo of a man from Vancouver with lacerations down his side. There's scratches, there's bite marks. The injuries extend from his shoulder to his waist, and they're oozing. Have you seen this image, David?
Yeah, I saw a picture of it over the weekend.
It's very intense. The injuries are what it looks like oozing. You can see from bloodstains on the sheets below him in the photo. This is a photo of a Vancouver, Washington man named Wilmer Toledo Martinez. He was detained by ICE outside of his home on November 14th. Senator Patty Murray's office is the one that sent that image out. And she gave an account of what had happened to cause these injuries to Wilmer. She posted on Blue Sky, "My constituent Wilmer was mauled by an ICE attack dog, despite the fact that, as he consistently explained, he was not resisting arrest or trying to flee. His wife and young children, all U.S. citizens, were forced to watch helplessly as Wilmer was violently attacked and dragged away." Toledo Martinez has no criminal record. He came to the U.S. when he was 15. His attorney told the Seattle Times that he had an arrest years ago for a misdemeanor for which he was not charged. We don't have comment from ICE on this yet. Murray called for Wilmer's immediate release from the Northwest ICE Processing Center. And we have, at this point, reached out to Wilmer's attorney, to his family through the attorney, and then also to Murray's office to learn more here, David. But first impressions, because this is a story that keeps coming back again and again, the increasing and expanding deportation operation and what is having the methods that are being resorted to by the Trump administration. First impressions for you when you saw this image?
Yeah, in addition to the obvious shock of the dog bites, and it is clear that there are dog bites, you can see that quite clearly on his skin, is the way in which this confrontation unfolded, which is that people dressed as construction workers approached his front door and asked him to come out because they said that they had hit his car and needed to talk to him, and then it turned out to be essentially an undercover operation. And that, to me, speaks to the differences in ICE, not only between the Trump administration and the Biden administration, but the Trump administration of the second Trump administration and the first one, which was, despite the rhetoric of that first Trump administration, there was still this sort of line that they drew around and an acknowledgement of the trust violations of having some of these operations at places like churches or schools or nurseries, or in this case, essentially they've created a ruse to get him to come out. And the obvious fear is that you are discouraging people from reaching out to seek services or work with the police department or go to the hospital and things that we want people to do. And I think this kind of undercover operation speaks to the fact that they don't really prioritize those boundaries anymore. Yeah,
not at all. And that is something that we've heard, for example, from local police when it comes to the Keep Washington Working Act. One of the reasons that, most sheriff's departments and police departments in Washington appreciate that law, or at least comply with that law, is because they want trust from the community to be able to speak to them when a crime occurs. They want people to be able to call about domestic assault and not be worried that you're going to flag somebody for deportation, things like that. Again, we have reached out to Wilmer's family. Just this image just grabbed me and kind of shook me because I think that you can hear numbers. You can hear hundreds of thousands of people deported, many more deciding to, not fight when they are confronted with deportation, not go through the usual process because, again, it's become so onerous. They are detained at a higher rate than they were before. But when you actually see it viscerally and a man's bleeding wounds from an ICE arrest, it makes you stop in your tracks and reconsider what's happening right now.
And there is a certain amount of laundering that happens when it's a dog that does this on behalf of law enforcement. And that's a bigger conversation that people have in law enforcement and the use of canines, which is whose responsibility is it when a dog does something like this? And a lot of times what happens is the dog is the one that gets the blame of the incident, when in fact, what we're talking about is the handler of a dog. This dog is just doing what the person has trained them to do. And so I think that that always kind of stands out to me when you hear about these kind of vicious law enforcement driven dog attacks, which is, okay, if we find this to be improper, is it actually who's going to be held responsible? And a lot of times it's the dog, and I'm not sure that is exactly who should be held responsible. Yeah.
Waiting to get more information again from Senator Murray's office, from Wilmer's family and his attorney. But that's our top story on Front Page today. Moving on.
What kinds of energy are there?
There's nuclear, mechanical, and solar energy. And
yes, this next story is about energy, green energy prices. You know, what the heck Washington State is going to do as we are trying to move into this brave new world of renewables, David, something you reported on. The renewables aren't showing up fast enough, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But this story came to us from Amanda Zoe at your outlet, the Seattle Times, who reported on a big wind farm that opened over the summer, actually, in Montana. And this is part of this story about Washington having to move, on these green goals, but maybe not all the pieces are in place. So why is a wind farm in Montana a big deal, David?
Puget Sound Energy is spending has spent $530 million on this wind farm. And as a reporter, I like following money because money doesn't lie. If Puget Sound Energy is spending that much money on this, that's how important it is, because they have investors they have to report to. And, I don't want to resort to hyperbole, but I think the energy story is going to be the biggest story of the next decade. And the reason for that is because within it is contained climate change, affordability, artificial intelligence, and then this question of whether government can deliver basic services to its constituents. And I think actually in nowhere else, this is going to be a national story, but I think the Northwest in particular is going to be kind of the ground zero of the story because a few things. One, our state has said we want to switch to entirely renewable energy. And that decision was made in 2019. And it's important to remember that in 2019, we were consuming less energy than we are now. So it seemed...
We were so innocent then.
I know. Yeah, exactly. There were, Seattle City Light at the time was worried that they weren't going to bring in enough revenue because we were so efficient. That is not the case anymore. And so that complicates that switch. But then this other piece, and we're going to go down the rabbit hole here a little bit, which is how many power lines exist and who owns those power lines. The most valuable thing about this wind farm is not the land and it's not the windmills. It's the fact that they can plug it in. And this question of who can plug into the energy grid is kind of the most important for Washington and really the whole West Coast, because up and down the whole West Coast, all the government bodies are going to be competing for these new resources, and who can get them online and who can access them is going to be this mad dash. Is why prices are going to go up. And so anyone who is sitting on a piece of line that's near a power line who can plug it in is sitting on gold.
So a lot of people might be like, okay, wind farm in Montana, great, we're going to pipe that in. But basically you're saying we can build all the wind farms we want, we can build all the solar that we want, but if we can't plug it in, it doesn't mean a damn thing for our state.
No, something like 75% of the transmission in Washington State is controlled by one federal entity, the Bonneville Power Association. You can find Woody Guthrie songs singing about Bonneville. And the problem with that is they're just horribly, horribly behind. And so you could turn, all of Eastern Washington into a solar panel grid, and it won't mean anything.
That's going to play really well in Pasco.
I know. Yeah. You could hear my hesitation saying that.
A lot of listeners on the east side of the mountains just really perked up.
Yeah, exactly. But that's another piece too. Is there's of course the sort of community concerns about where you actually put this stuff. But again, all of that is secondary, tertiary to the fact that if you are a developer right now and you have this great piece of land and you've decided today, you woke up today, I want to put solar panels on that, you're not going to be able to plug those in until the 2030s at least. And so this combination of, we have data centers coming online, we have this push to clean up our energy grid. there is a reason why, the average cost of a bill is going to go up 18% if you're in a Puget Sound Energy customer. And
almost 19.
And if you're a Seattle City Light customer, your rates are also going to go up. And this is in a place where we've just gotten really comfortable with having cheap renewable electricity because of the hydro dams on Columbia River and the Diablo Lake and Ross Lake dams. Those aren't cutting it anymore, and so we have to find new resources.
Drought, all kinds of reasons those aren't cutting it. So this is the Beaver Creek Wind Farm. You can check out the story in the Seattle Times. Amanda Zoe writes about it. And the reason that she's writing about it now is because utilities have to be totally off coal next year, and then we're going to be moving towards these goals of utilities being carbon neutral by 2030, having emission-free electricity totally by 2045. But as you can hear, we've got some questions about that and how that's going to be achieved. Let's get to our next story on the front page.
When I was building Bilbao, the public thought, this thing ain't going to fit in here. This looks like something that fell from Mars. But I really tied it into the city, and I think I've done the same with EMP.
That is the legendary avant-garde architect Frank Gehry, who died last week. That was a conversation that he was having about the EMP, now called Mopop. I was scrolling when I heard that Frank Gehry had passed through images from his iconic buildings across the world, David. And, the Guggenheim in Bilbao, Spain, the Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles. There are these gorgeous sculptures in Barcelona and Paris. You know what is not on the list? The Mopop, the Museum of Pop Culture right here at the Seattle Center, also known in my head as Paul Allen's great temple to Jimi Hendrix, the smash guitar temple to Jimi Hendrix. The building is 25 years old this year, and I'm curious, what do you think about kind of the legacy of Frank Gehry in Seattle? Because he has a mixed response, let's say, when we talk about Mopop and what people think about that great big building.
Yeah, I mean, I think universally when people think Seattle and music, they go to grunge. But then, when I look at Mopop and the Mopop building, I don't see grunge. Do you?
No, I don't.
What I see is Jimi Hendrix, and that was kind of because its original incarnation, as you mentioned, was Paul Allen was this mega Jimi Hendrix fan. He had, he got a shard of a Fender guitar that Jimi Hendrix had smashed in Monterey at a late 60s concert. He was fully obsessed, and so he wanted to build this cathedral to it and to him. And
well, he needed a place to put the collection too.
Yes,
I mean, when
exactly.
you have that much stuff in storage, you got to put it somewhere.
Exactly, yeah. And so the concept that they came up with was a smashed guitar that sort of represents the kind of psychedelic age of Jimi Hendrix. But for me, this is kind of the central underlying tension of that building, which is that Jimi Hendrix's relationship to Seattle, and I would say Seattle's relationship to Jimi Hendrix, is sort of a tense one in some ways, because he grew up in Seattle, yes, but he got big in London. He experienced a lot of racism in Seattle. Even when he came back as a superstar, there were stories of him going to Garfield High School where he went and being heckled by people there. And that, I think, is kind of interesting, which is that you've got this cathedral this sculpture to somebody who's, is very important to the city, but that has had this kind of tenuous relationship. And I think as a result, you get this building that reflects something that is not, in a lot of people's minds, particularly Seattle. It's not, the rest of the Seattle skyline is very conservative. If you look at the skyline from the waterfront, that's all capped at these kind of specific heights. And then you've got Mopop, which is this kind of psychedelic display of curviness and swooping. And I think that just kind of puts this interesting tension, and in some ways, though, reflects Seattle's relationship to Jimi Hendrix for me, which is a tense one. And for that reason, I actually kind of like the building because...
Whoa, that's a turn.
Yeah,
I didn't see that.
It is a turn.
Coming. Okay.
I think there was a reviewer who, architect David Miller at the time, he called it a bit irresponsible and irreverent in the way the music it represents was. It's gutsy, and then he said, Seattle needs a few buildings like that, just not too many. And for that, I think I really appreciate it because it is so not Seattle in a lot of ways, and yet very Seattle in other ways, which is it was trying to be innovative. They were pioneering all these new technologies to build it. They had 3D modeling.
Yeah, they used this aerospace 3D modeling technology to put these metal shingles up because Gehry had the Guggenheim, design kind of out there already, and people were looking at those titanium shingles that cover it.
Yes.
And they thought, I'd like that for my next building. You see it at the Walt Disney Concert Hall. You see it at the EMP or the Mopop now. And yeah, in that way, it is also very Seattle because it was so high tech. And the modeling of it had to be so precise so that engineers and fabricators could make those metal shingles shaped exactly and fitting exactly where they needed to be. The Guggenheim in Spain, by the way, is titanium shingles, but we got like painted aluminum and steel. So a little bit of they're supposed to be shinier and brighter at night, but I think titanium sounds fancier. Can I just say, though, that in the early 2000s, people who cared about architecture in Seattle were going through it.
Yes.
Because we had the Rem Koolhaas Central Library design that also had a lot of hecklers, but I think has aged very well and is way less controversial today. And then we had the Frank Gehry broken guitar, which apparently when he designed it, he actually broke up these Stratocasters and moved them around and used those for modeling. Everybody, though, can agree to disagree about like a controversial piece of architecture, and that's kind of the fun of it, right? That people can have a strong opinion and you do get a conversation started, and that is very unlike most of the skyline in Seattle.
Very much so. It's also was in some ways always unfair to Gehry because the spot of the EMP is literally in the shadow of the Space Needle, which I think is kind of, I don't think there was ever going to be any replacing the Space Needle, whatever you feel about it, as the iconic piece of architecture that defines Seattle.
Yeah.
And so you have EMP, which is supposed to be in its own right, this kind of spectacular sculpture, but it was always going to be second fiddle at best to the Space Needle, which was just a few steps away. And really the whole, for my money, the Pacific Science Center arches too really define Seattle in a way.
The peace arches, yeah, I love them.
And so you have all of Seattle Center, which is sort of the most essential distillation of Seattle architecture, and then you've got Mopop right in the middle of it, which is exactly the opposite. And so it was always going to be inherently a tense relationship to the city. But again, I'm not particularly conservative when it comes to how we allow our cities to be shaped. And so I like controversial pieces of architecture within. I think it makes the city more interesting. I do have to read, though, my favorite negative review. And this was out of a New York Times review where from Herbert Muschamp, who just praised Muschamp, who heaped huge amounts of praise on the library, just loved the library.
The Koolhaas library, okay.
He called the library a blazing chandelier to swing your dreams on.
Oh, my.
Which I thought was very beautiful. But then he gets to the Experience Music Project, and he said, it looks like something that crawled out of the sea, rolled over, and died. And that, I think, that's incredible to me. And,
all right, Muschamp, I see you working.
I think aesthetically, I honestly don't know how I feel about it, but its presence in Seattle as a point of tension and friction and innovation that maybe didn't work, I really like.
Yeah, I think I would be with you on that. Tough draw, as you say, to be sitting next to the most iconic, a landmark piece of architecture, in our city by far, the Needle. But what's not a tough draw? It was actually a good draw. Team USA's draw for the World Cup, which happened on Friday, and through the weekend, there was a lot of talk about would we be in a group with a really big European powerhouse, etc. No, we had a pretty good draw with Australia, Paraguay, and then likely Turkey. USA will play Australia in Seattle on June 19th. We also know the other Seattle games, at least for the round of 32, and that includes Liverpool superstar Mo Salah being here with Egypt. Belgium will be playing. They're a storied European squad. That'll be fun for Seattle fans to see. Iran also here with a match which is complicated by the new travel ban restrictions on Iranians. Are you a soccer fan, David?
I am not a soccer fan. I am a soccer appreciator. I'm a sports fan. I didn't grow up with soccer, but power to everybody who knows and enjoys it better than I do.
All I have to say to that is, goal! And thank you so much, David Kroman, for being here for Front Page. I really appreciate it. It was fun.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I had a great time.
David Kroman of the Seattle Times. And if you have something to add to anything we talked about on Front Page, leave us a voicemail at 206-221-3213 or soundside@kuow.org is our email. Again, that voicemail line is 206-221-3213. I know you have opinions about the Frank Gehry Mopop building. Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime right here online at KUOW.org, or of course on your favorite podcast app.